Welcome to the War Academy channel. When we analyze the Second World War, one of the first conclusions reached is that the German army continued to fight long after having exceeded any limit. Far from surrendering after being widely defeated in the Soviet Union, or on the Western Front, after the breakout of the front in Normandy, the Wehrmacht continued to fight until it was practically annihilated. Next, in today's program, we will see how this was possible. Why did the German soldiers fight so fiercely to the end? What were the last hopes fueled by war propaganda? What did they think about their enemies? And finally, what were the last intentions of generals like Busse or Heinrici to continue resisting in this way? Well then, let's see it. Let's start with the last question we just raised, this being a curious conversation that Busse and Heinrici had in early April 1945, a few days before the final Soviet offensive on Berlin. My intention is to hold out in the Oder long enough, until the Americans reach Berlin. If we can be capable of such action, we will have fulfilled our mission before our people, our country, and history, Busse told Heinrici. Haven't you heard of the Eclipse Plan? Heinrici asked Busse in surprise. The general of the Ninth Army told him no. Heinrici then went on to explain the content of that document, which had been captured a few months ago, in which it was shown how Germany was going to be divided up. It must be said that this matter was totally confidential, and Heinrici had had access to it through General Jodl. What Heinrici came to tell Busse is that it did not matter exactly if the Soviets were retained, because in the end, the areas of occupation were already fixed, and half of Germany was going to end up falling under Soviet hands inevitably. In any case, this intention to delay the Soviets as long as possible, so that Germany would be occupied by the Americans and the British, was something that all the generals who had not had access to this secret information had. This was, without a doubt, one of the most important reasons that motivated the troops of the Eastern Front to fight until the last breath. In point number 2, we have the idea that was continually sold, that the Allied bloc was going to fragment at any moment, since it was an unnatural alliance. This was intended for the troops to fight for a longer time, waiting for their enemies to fight each other. This last hope was very present during the final battle for Berlin, and there were specifically two events that reinforced it. First of all, we have the death of US President Roosevelt, with which it was hoped that the Allied bloc would end up fragmenting. This happened just a few days before Soviet troops entered the German capital. The other action was precisely an incursion by US aircraft over Berlin on the night of April 23, in which no bomb was dropped. This event was used to sell that the alliance between Germany and the United States was going to arrive in a few hours. Finally, it was also hinted that a large army of the Western Allies was heading to Berlin to save them from the Soviets. As a third point, we also have another thought that many German soldiers had. This alluded to the fact that no matter how bad war was, peace would be even worse. By the summer of 1944, with the Allied landing in France, and with the powerful Soviet offensive at Bagration, it was clear to everyone, including the German soldiers, that the Third Reich was not going to win the war. With Roosevelt's statement in early 1943, in which he insisted that they would only accept Germany's unconditional surrender, it was also more than clear what the fate of the Germans would be when the war was over. There are numerous statements by Wehrmacht soldiers who said the following: "I would rather die in Normandy defending my country than spend the rest of my life cutting down trees in Canada or Siberia." These Allied intentions of not accepting anything other than unconditional surrender, with a foreseeable occupation of Germany for decades, was fully exploited by German propaganda itself to motivate their troops to fight to the end. For practical purposes, it is like cornering a very dangerous wounded animal, which is left with no choice but to continue fighting for its life. In summary, the key idea of this point is that they could either fight and try to save the situation, or live the rest of their days in conditions of slavery in Siberia. On this basis, Soviet propaganda made numerous efforts during the final campaigns of the war to make the Germans believe that they were going to be given a good deal. With this they intended, as is evident, that they would stop putting up such fierce resistance. As point number 4 we have the promise that was made to the front-line soldiers, as well as to the generals themselves, that new miraculous weapons were to come, and that with them, they would win the war. Jet planes would regain control of the skies, monstrous new tanks would stop any enemy ground offensive, and new ballistic missiles would devastate Allied capitals, forcing them to surrender. These main weapons, along with other lesser ones, motivated many soldiers, and even marshals like Rommel, to keep fighting, hoping for a radical turn of events. Fifthly, and not least, we have the belief that it was continually instilled in the German troops, which hinted that their enemies were on the verge of collapse. Everyone had seen the heavy casualties the Soviets had sustained, and the unprecedented waste of material by the Americans. The question they asked themselves was, how far were they going to be able to keep up that pace? His resources would someday have to come to an end. When many German soldiers began to be taken prisoner by the Americans and British in France, the Germans were shocked to be told that London or New York was not completely in ruins, just as their propaganda had told them. Be that as it may, and by way of summary, the slogan was that it was necessary to resist a little more, since their enemies were also on the verge of collapse, after the numerous efforts made. As point number 6, we have one of the most important of all, if not directly the most important, this being the resistance to the death to defend their own families. When, in early 1945, the Allies reached Germany's original borders, whether on the Rhine or East Prussia, the stake was no longer to withdraw from previously conquered territory in France or the Soviet Union, for they were directly their cities that were in danger. In addition, they were all aware of the abuses that would await their relatives, and it was directly for them that they were fighting. In any case, lest they forget, the German leader sent the following communication to his troops, just as the Soviets launched their final assault on April 16. Soldiers of the German East Front. For the last time, the deadly Bolshevik enemy goes on the attack with his hordes. He tries to destroy Germany and exterminate our people. You soldiers from the East already know the fate that threatens German women, girls, and children. The elderly and children will be killed, women and girls will be turned into camp prostitutes. The rest will go to Siberia. Although the harangue is much longer, it finally concludes as follows. In these hours the entire German people is watching over you, my warriors in the East. I only hope that thanks to your perseverance, your fanaticism, your weapons, and your hand, the Bolshevik avalanche will be drowned in its own blood. Finally, and also at this point, there was a general idea that had been inculcated in everyone, that while the enemy had regained their lost territory in France or the Soviet Union, they would never gain a foothold in Germany. As point 7, and to close the program, we have the simplest reason of all, which, despite this, is still striking. When German fighters, regardless of their rank, were captured and asked why they continued to fight like this if all was lost, his answer was often that that was what he had been ordered to do. It is my duty as a soldier to continue fighting until my superiors tell me otherwise. Many responded. Well, what do you think? Which of these points do you give more importance to? Do you think that if the Allies had proposed another alternative to unconditional surrender, the war would have ended much sooner? I leave you in the description other programs in which we have analyzed live how these last months were lived in Germany. And well, this video ends here. Thank you all very much, especially the sponsors who make this possible. Subscribe and share this program if you liked it, and see you in the next one. See you soon.